National Geographic Today, exploring the world and all its wonder. This is National Geographic Today.
Well, February is Black History Month, and we're starting our celebrations here on National Geographic Today by telling the story of one very special man. That's Father Moses Berry from southwestern Missouri. Now, it's a frightening thing for all of us to face the ghosts of your past, especially when those ghosts are your own ancestors who had to suffer horribly at the hands of racial injustice. Most people would just run away, but not Father Berry. He did the opposite. He went back to his birthplace to tell the stories of the past in order to make a better future.
In the quiet town of Ash Grove, Missouri, Father Moses Berry wants to lay old demons to rest.
This particular quilt.
Nearly every day, he tells visitors to his tiny museum the story of slavery, its impact and its legacy in this community.
This is a neck iron.
For Father Berry, himself a descendant of slaves, it's a very personal story.
And this goes through here and acts as a padlock, and that's how they held them secure.
And it's a story he wants visitors to understand through their experience here.
Can you imagine having this on, moving from place to place? Of course, they wouldn't be this kind. Well, it's a perfect fit. So this is how a person would be confined. It was a horrible thing. You know, this was an instrument, a mean instrument that held the slaves captive. And I also think it's a beautiful thing because I know it held my ancestors.
Images of his ancestors cover the walls, but theirs is an uncommon history in this part of the Ozarks, a place many black families fled because of what happened nearly a century ago. On Good Friday 1906, in nearby Springfield, Missouri, a lynch mob swarmed the jail and grabbed 3 black men accused of raping a white woman. The men were hanged from a tower in the middle of the public square. The white woman who claimed the 3 black men raped her later admitted that her story wasn't true. But the damage was done and celebrated. Someone in Springfield even minted a coin.
On the one side, 1906, Good Friday. And on the other side of the coin it said, the lynching of 3 niggers.
In the days after the lynching, panic spread among black residents, and thousands left the Springfield area, never to return. Father Berry's family was one of the few that stayed. Racial animosity continued for decades. And so, when after years of work in Eastern Orthodox churches around the country, Father Berry decided to return to Ash Grove and open his museum, friends cautioned him.
My family friends called me here and they said, you know, you better be careful opening up a museum in that little town. White folks aren't going to like it.
Despite that warning, he says the reception here has been warm. Townspeople even helped him clean up his family's cemetery, overgrown and almost forgotten for decades. The tombstone of his great-great-grandmother, a slave, is barely standing. Many other slaves are buried in unmarked graves here. A few years ago, Father Berry moved his family back into the farmhouse where his grandmother raised him. Nearby, he built this new church. It's no bigger than a single-car garage. But within this small frame, he holds to his faith and his quest for racial harmony. In this way, Father Berry hopes to resurrect his hometown's lost heritage of black Americans.
I can look back at my ancestors and go, these guys endured. They were slaves and children of slaves, and they were able to live their life and leave behind a loving legacy that people even today appreciate.
Oh, charity, charity, step along. Oh, charity, charity, step along. Oh, charity, charity, step along. If you ain't got charity, you ain't got nothing at all.
Well, that's our little town church in Ash Grove, Missouri. So you may have recognized some people in there. Catherine, but she's a little girl. At any rate, as I said before, my name is Father Moses Berry, and I live in the house that my great-grandparents built in 1871. I was raised by people who were stout Christians, who actually tried to embody as much as possible and ask God for the increase to embody the Christian principles. Once when I was a boy, sitting on the back porch of my grandmother's house, this was my present-day house, I asked her, because I was always concerned about the idea of different races of people. So I asked her why there were so many races of people. And of course, I was just a little boy, probably no older than you. And I asked her why there were so many races, and she said, "Son, that's easy. That's easy, because we're all flowers in God's garden." It's a very nice thing for a child to hear. But it wasn't nearly enough for a man. So I spent most of my life until I decided to abandon all modern life and live in counterculture. I spent all my life trying to find out where those flowers in God's garden were that looked like me, and I couldn't find them. Where were those heroes in the church that looked like me, and I couldn't find them? Of course, there were some examples here and there that I knew about, and namely, there was St. Martin de Tours. That was a good example, but I didn't like him because he was always shown in these little Roman depictions on these little holy cards of him standing around with little kitty cats at his feet and, looking little puppy dogs. I was looking for a Hallmark sign cards inscription that says "hang in there" somewhere. So it wasn't very inspiring to young boy, especially not young black boy, who had already about to give up on any other worldliness in the Christian tradition. Where were those flowers in God's garden that looked like me? My brother died in Laos in 1963 during the Vietnam War, when America said that we had no troops in Laos, but body bags were coming home from Laos of all the soldiers who had been killed there, and they were listed as advisors. So I became completely disillusioned with the whole idea of trusting in modern times, or trusting in anything of value in this world. And I've always been somewhat of an extremist, so I took it to its furthest point. And I still didn't find those flowers in God's garden that looked like me. And so I ran away from home when I was 15 years old and decided to go away we just moved to Jefferson City, and I'm going to go away to the West Coast and find out why there were people wearing flowers in their hair. And so I did, and I went to the West Coast, and I stayed there for a while, and then came back to Jefferson City, Missouri. And everywhere I went, I looked for those flowers in God's garden that looked like me, and I couldn't find them. Just couldn't find them. And this well-kept secret, as we often refer to the Orthodox Church as being a well-kept secret, was being kept from me as well. It was being kept to me, and maybe the times that it was presented, it was only presented as an ethnic church. An ethnic church that belonged to certain groups of people. Maybe Greeks, maybe Russians, maybe Bulgarian, Ukrainian, or something of this nature, maybe even a few Ethiopians spread about here and there, and they were equally as foreign. They were equally as foreign. So this well-kept secret was being kept from us. And so I thought, well, who cares about these flowers in God's garden? My wife and I were living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and we decided that we would go visit one of our friends who lived in Richmond, Virginia. And so we went. We were young, of course, in our 20s, and we decided to get in the car and just drive to Richmond, Virginia. And we drove down the highway as fast as we could from Atlanta to Richmond, playing Beatles songs on the radio, on the cassette, and driving fast, only to be stopped by the police. And so by the time we got to Richmond, it was about 6 o'clock in the evening. And when our friend met us, we went to his house. He said, "Oh, you're late. We must leave right now. And we must go to a Vesper service." I didn't know what that was. We must go to a Vesper service at this church that I just found out about, this Orthodox church. And I thought, oh my goodness, I don't want to go there. Because if I go there, first of all, it'll just be a bunch of white people. Number one, which I was right. And they will be so generous because John, my friend, goes there. So there'll have to be a certain ilk of people. And they will be singing Kumbaya and all these things that people do to try to relate to people who are not like them. And I was working myself into somewhat of a small frenzy about going to this church. And so my wife, of course, which everyone knows is much more civilized, asked me to come and be a good guest. So we went to the church, and there was a house church in Richmond, Virginia. And I remember going up the stairs because the church was on the second floor, and the priest and his family lived down below on the first floor. And I remember going up the back stairs and thinking to myself, as I say, raised AME, pastor's son, third generation, I said, this isn't even really a house, a church rather. This must be a house or something like that. I don't know what it is. It doesn't look like a church to me. So we went inside, and there were 3 people that made up the choir, which later I found out, through my own experience, was probably the priest, the priest's wife and his daughter maybe, and one of the faithful. And I said to my wife, right there in the middle of the church, because I had no regard for those people, I said, this isn't even really a choir. And of course she said, pipe down. And so I just didn't like this at all. And all these depictions around the wall, I kind of got that. It's like, must be the life of Jesus. It's okay, but I don't know about it. And then I looked back at the choir. And the choir was singing, "Rejoice, thou through whom God will flash forth. Rejoice, revival of fallen Adam. Rejoice, redemption of the curse of Eve. Rejoice, thou bride unwedded." And I never heard such combination of words before in my life. I didn't even know that you could put those words together. And so they must be speaking foreign language. After all, the sign did say something about Russian church. So I went up so I said, okay, I like it. I just don't understand it. But something inside me understood it. As Bishop Michael said in his presentation, you can get that online somewhere. I'll tell you how to do that later because it's much better than we were able to reproduce it here. The first time I walked into that church, he said, I fell in love. But the love affair didn't happen immediately. And so the priest came out of the altar, out of the iconostasis, out of these royal doors, and he was sensing. And I did not care for that idea of sensing. I thought, because my orientation to incense was something that masked smells. And I didn't like that. So the priest came out and the choir began to sing, "Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered." I kind of understood that a little bit, And then the choir started singing, "Now let thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all people, of light of revelation for the Gentile, and the glory of thy people Israel." And it just sounded exactly the way that my ancestors preached and taught. It was the same thing. We have a little cemetery on our property, the one that I spoke of, that's dedicated to slaves and Indians and paupers from 1875. It's on the National Historic Sites Registry. And when we came back to the country from living in St. Louis, we moved back down there. There were still a few of the old folks left, the grandchildren of slaves. My mom and my great aunts and all those people, they were still there. And we would go there and we would sing the song, singing the kathas for the departed. A song for the departed, if you will. That's just what that means, a kathas, a song for the departed. And I thought they would probably like that because, everything I did, they liked. Everything I did, they loved it because they knew how to love people. They knew how to love people, how to look after someone. This is such an example. I feel so fortunate for having known that, and so condemned for having learned that and known that and not followed through on it to the degree that I should have. And so we started singing this song about the departed, and one part there has about people. It was for all sorts of situations of people who had died, Orthodox people and non-Orthodox people. This particular kathas did, and they talked about people who had taken their lives through madness of mind. And there was a lady there whose son had committed suicide. And it was such a relief for her to know that her son was not condemned forever to torment. But we can even pray for those who have deliberately taken their lives. That's a part of the Orthodox tradition. I want you to know that. I don't want you to be confused with what folks tell you about there's no hope for people who do such things. Because that means there is no God. Because God can do all things. So just want to make that clear, because I know you haven't been taught that. So anyway, they sang this song, and I was a little bit, a little nervous, because these are my relatives. These people can sing. They can really, they're real singers, and gospel singers. And my Aunt Willetta came up to me and she said, "Oh, honey, that sounds just the way the old folks used to sing." And I thought, well, she's been nice to. They love me. She's just been nice. The old folks didn't sing like that. They don't know about the fifth tone or the sixth tone. And so then it occurred to me that it did sound like the old folks, because it was a mixture of joyful sorrow. It was a mixture of brokenheartedness and hope. It was a mixture of no chance of redemption and all the chance for redemption that Orthodox music so often portrays. If you have an ear to hear, if you're not like me, who says this isn't even a choir. And so the priest came out of the iconostasis and he begins to sense this icon screen here. And he first went to the icon of Jesus, and he sensed before it, and beside that icon, in the place that you have, who's it, St. Herman? St. Ephraim? Of St. Ephraim, 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 St. Ephra he began to sense that one, and I looked at that icon, and it was Saint Cyprian of Carthage. Saint Cyprian of Carthage from North Africa. And he was black. Whoa. I've seen a few of those little icons. He never was black, even though he was from North Africa, which is a little, somebody didn't know the geography, right? And I thought, well, that's nice to see that. And then I turned to the icon as he was sensing before the Mother of God, and beside him was an icon of her, rather, was an icon of Saint Moses the Black, painted as actually by the same iconographer. She's a lady from France, an iconographer from France. You know, I could tell her work so easily. So, at any rate, and I thought, oh my goodness. And then I remembered what I've been looking for all those years, the flowers in God's garden that look like me. And I hadn't found them up until this point. You need a prominent icon in here of, take your pick, Saint Africanus, one of the martyrs, one of the 70, Saint Moses, Saint Cyprian of Carthage, Saint Irene and Sophia, or any number one that you can have. You know, you don't have to, these are expensive things to get, but you can have a nice copy made, nice print with the canvas on canvas. Yeah. So these are the flowers in God's garden that look like us. These are the flowers in God's garden that you can relate to. And you can relate to it because you're not sensitive enough. I am not sensitive enough to say, to realize that every depiction of the saint has the same application to any of us. We're just not there yet. It's okay. Maybe we won't get there. But in the meantime, we will paint true icons of the saints. And I turned to that priest there and I said to the priest, oh, I see what you're doing. Because I said, they lived in a predominantly black neighborhood. And I said, oh, I see what you're doing. You're trying to appeal to the African-American community around here. Good trick, but it won't work. And he said, oh, no. These icons are genuine depictions from, from the history of the church. We have all kinds of representations of the saints from all over the world. And he said, here's St. John Maximovich from Russia. And here's St. Peter the Aleut from Alaskan Native. And here were the saints of the Boxer Rebellion from China on another wall. And he went through there and named all those saints that were part of God's garden, that looked like the whole world. And I thought, oh my goodness, I think I found what I'm looking for. I think I found what I'm looking for. And no one had to say another word about these flowers in God's garden. No one had to say another thing about the church belonging to me. Because at first glance, you think perhaps, what does this have to do with me? What does this Eastern, what does this Eastern church have to do with me? I am African-American person, someone might say. Or I am a Baptist from the Appalachians, some other might say. What does it have to do with me? Because we don't present our church as being universal. But every liturgy we sing this one holy Catholic and apostolic church. This universal church that applies to every man and every woman and every child. But we don't see that depicted on our walls. I believe that in order for a person to find deification, they must know that for a person to be deified, they must know that deification is possible in their flesh. That's the way it is, because that's how dense we are. It would be nice to continue to pretend that there are no differences in people. It would be nice to say, as a person said to me once, Hierarch said this to me most recently, oh, Father Moses, I'm just colorblind. And I said, I have fun driving back to your city because you won't know you won't know what happens when you come to the red light. So what he really meant to say was that he didn't condemn anyone for being of a different race. That's what he really meant to say. But in order to say, when we begin to say such things as we are colorblind, we don't recognize that this is God's work. The different races are God's. That's God's area. And he made them all. We used to do this when we were children, when we would sing those simple songs that most of us in the Protestant world, forgive me, cradle Orthodox, but we would sing such things as red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. We knew that then as children. Do you know that song, girls? No, you have to. I'll teach it to you later. We knew that there was different. We knew that there was difference in the people. We didn't pretend like we were all the same. Because if we pretend that we're all the same, we don't acknowledge that God has a plan. And God did not make a mistake. And he did not, this is not a random thing. That bishop went on to say to me, yes, but Father, God does not see race. God does not see color. And I said, not only does he see color, he made color. Not only does he see color, but he approves of it to the degree that he said, I will have this variety. If I can put some human attribute toward God Almighty, which is much more cosmic than words can utter. But I'll utter these words so we can at least have some connection. This is God's work. So in order for us to become the universal church, we must begin to acknowledge that we are part of that church. I remember the first time that I learned, I was 21 years old before I read a book. That's why I'm such a poor reader now. I was dyslexic, and I had such a bad condition that the letters jumped around on the pages for me. And so when I was in Missouri State Penitentiary, 21 years old, I went in there at 19. And in a 4.5-foot cell by 6.5 foot with 12-foot ceiling and no windows. Don't worry if you're jailbird brothers. Don't worry about it if you've been there. That's not the problem, being there. It's not learning anything from being there. That's the problem. It's not a curse to be there. It's the curse not to learn anything from being there. And I just said, God, what am I going to do here? And he said, I'll teach you to read. I'm putting flesh and blood on it again. I'll teach you to read. And so I began to read. I read my first book called Strange Signposts, some science fiction book, because that's all you had to do in there. They brought you these little books around in a cart, and they give you a book. Sometimes they'd throw the book in there. It's a bad time. This was before prison reform. Before prison reform. Where sometimes they would offer you a glass of coffee, a cup of coffee, and sometimes they would have a cup of urine and they pour it on you. Bad times in America. Where you can learn to curse your brother in a real way. This is not a joke. Or you can learn to love your brother. So I got a glimpse of how to love your brother when I found out there was a guard there. His name was Fairchild. He was a mean man. A mean man. I would tell you some stories, but they would only serve to scandalize you. And then everybody knew that Fairchild's daughter had fallen out of a window and died. And I had the chance at that point to say, good for you. I'm glad that it happened to you. Now you know the pain that you inflict on other people. Or I had the chance to say, oh my goodness, that poor dear. And that poor man's heart must be breaking in two. And I chose the latter. And so they had a man in there, and his name was, I don't know what his real name was. We called him the pretty boy from Illinois. What a name. I don't even know if he was handsome, because we're all in solitary confinement. 4.5 foot by 6.5 foot, 12-foot ceiling and no windows. We didn't even know what each other looked like. But the cops came down. They said that Fairchild had gotten out of his cell. And he had gone up on the elevator, which requires a key, and went into the jailer's office and stole money from the safe. Went back downstairs and locked himself up. That's one of the age-old stories. I don't know if you've ever heard that one before. That's an old one. Yeah, that's one of the old ones that they used to frame people. And I prayed to God in that cell because I didn't believe in him at that time. As a matter of fact, I cursed him. Because if that's what God is, what I see, then I don't believe in it. I couldn't possibly believe in it. Because if that's God, not for me. Didn't know about what you know. Didn't know about the things that you take for granted. So, could have known, but didn't know. And so they took him out of his cell, and they beat him with a transistor radio wrapped in a towel. And every time he would pass out, they would revive him. Since we have tender ears, we won't say how they revived him. They revived him. And I prayed that night. I said, God, if you help me, I will serve you. I didn't really mean it because all I knew was like to be something like modern black church. And whatever that wasn't the essence of this Christianity that I saw it. Yeah. I'm not, in case you're wondering, I'm not talking against that church, by the way. And so, the next day, the jailers came down, and they said, Barry, put on your clothes, you're going home. That's me. Barry, my last name is Barry. And I said, no way. I'm not leaving this cell. I saw what you did to Pretty. I'm not going out of this cell. And so the jailer said, well, stay in there then. And my dilemma was, should I stay or should I go? A little humor from a new song. Should I stay or should I go? And so I went. And as I was going down the corridor, I said, aha, they're going to shoot me. Because they did those things, you know. This is a different time for you younger people. You don't know about the 60s and the early 70s in this country. So, anyway, maybe you do. Those historians among you. And so I said, they're going to shoot me when I get down here, and no one shot. I got downstairs to the processing room, and they gave me my clothes. All except for my boots. I had a pair of Tony Lama cowboy boots, and they didn't give them to me. I said, well, where are my boots? And they said, you didn't have any boots. And I said, right. And I went away, and so I went out downstairs, and I got and the jailer gave me $20. That was big money then, you know. It was enough to get home in a cab, and so or to the station at least. And as I was in the car, there was a voice, and I don't know where the voice came from. If it came from inside me, from inside the car, or somewhere from the eternal. But it said, if I help you, you will serve me. That's what I said, you know. But I just didn't know how I was going to do that. Robert Glover, this boy that you knew. Robert Glover and me decided that I could not make good on that promise, and he couldn't make good on his promises. He'd made the same promises. And so we went away. We ran away to Hawaii. Not ran away. We just fled to Hawaii. I'm leaving out some years in here, in case you're wondering. It would take too long. So we went away to Hawaii, and we lived in Pat Boone's house in Manoa Valley. He had a rental house up there. And we lived in his house because we had pockets full of ill-gotten gains. And so I still didn't know where those flowers were in God's garden that looked like me. And those flowers that inspired the saints. The same Spirit that inspired our ancestors and made them have the nerve and the energy and the bravery and the sanctity to flee from captivity in the South to freedom in the North. I don't know if any of you all have seen that movie called Harriet, which is out. It's not exactly historically accurate, but there were certain things in there that were quite moving. And what it was that what moved me the most was that from an otherworldly standpoint, from an otherworldly view of things, who can help me? Man can't help me. Man's got a reward for me. Can the black man help me? That's one of the slave catchers. Can the white man help me? That's one of my captors. Who can help me? And it came down to only God can help me. Now, if we don't know who this God is, if we don't understand, mark this down, look it up, and go for it. Orthodox dogmatic theology. What the church has always believed concerning our Christian faith. We didn't know that. So God said, these are ignorant people. And so therefore, they don't even know how to read from that movie. They don't even know how to read. So I will plant it in their hearts. And as the old Negro spiritual says, my mama, she taught me how to read. My mama, she taught me how to pray. If I don't pray, my soul will be lost. Nobody's fault but mine. You know that song? Great song. You should brush up on those songs, because those were songs that were filled with the Orthodox dogmatic meaning. Do you follow me? You know, there were three phases of that musical genre that we as African American people experienced, and I don't know about anybody else, but we as African American people experienced. One was the spirituals. This is what Weldon Johnson breaks it down into. The spirituals, where people would look for the day ahead. Look for the day ahead when they were still like the Hebrew children. When they would sing such songs as "Go Down, Moses, Let My People Go." And they would sing such songs as spiritual songs as "I've Got a Home in Glory Land that outshines the sun." And then a little bit later, around just after the Civil War, we had what we call the spirituals, or the Gospels rather. And the Gospels talked about redemption, and where it relied on the hand of Jesus. The hand of Jesus. And now it's come down to this music that's unrecognizable as being salvific at all. Some people call it praise music or something of this nature, where you do things with your hands and do things with your bodies, and even certain kind of tonal quality that you think will lift you up from where you are fallen to heights, when in fact it's just something that excites your senses. Excites your senses and doesn't bring you any closer to God Almighty. Was that offensive? No? Was that offensive? Yes, it was? Okay. Sorry for offense. I got to tell you something. The Orthodox Church was made for the African American people. And we were never evangelized. But now your mother taught you how to read. Your mother taught you how to pray. And if you don't pray, your soul will be lost. Nobody's fault but yours. Nobody's fault but yours if you don't come into the fullness of the faith. And the fullness of the faith is not made by hands. So, at any rate, there we are. I want to talk a little bit more about the way we look at ourselves. This little doll, I was just last The last time I was in your area, I was in a place called Oberlin College. You know where that's not too far, is it? Yeah, in Oberlin. And I went and I was giving a talk there at a cemetery. There's an ancient African American cemetery there. Do you know about that? You should visit that place. It's wonderful. And you have beautiful stones there, and all this beautiful stone carvers who made these tombstones. And I went there, and they asked me to come and give a talk at the cemetery for Juneteenth in maybe 2010. And I came, and I brought some quilts and other things there, because there were older ladies there who were crafts women, and they did this kind of work, and I brought this doll out. This is a slave doll. This is actually made by a slave for my grandma, dowry in 1907. Can you still hear me? Back in the back? I think I'm walking away from the mic, right? Yeah, you do that. And so I was in that cemetery and giving this talk about this doll, and I said, well, this is a mammy doll. And of course the young people went, mammy. What a bad, condescending word. They didn't know that mammy was a West African word for matriarch. How about that? Mammy is a West African word for matriarch. And you don't get to be a mammy just because you're old. All you get to be, take it from the old one, not the oldest, but an older one. All you get to be when you're old is just old. If you want to be a matriarch, or in my case, a patriarch, if that's what you want to be, it's going to require a lot. You're going to have to be long-suffering. You're going to have to be tremendously tolerant. You're going to have to wake up from your warm bed and give your neighbor who knocks on the door a loaf of bread when you're all settled in for the first time and you've been having insomnia anyway. You wake from your warm bed and you smile and say, come in and take this. That's what makes a mammy. That's what makes a matriarch. And I said, and she said, so I was telling her, and I said, this is all hand tatting here. And this little girl said, well, what's tatting, mister? And I said, well, tatting is something like lace. And this old lady who was in the 90s said to me, she said, it's nothing like lace. Stop saying that to those children. It's nothing like lace. And I went, oh dear, it's happening again. Just when I thought I knew something, or I pretended, or at least I had them fooled. They thought I knew something. And here comes this lady telling me what the real story is. So she said, that's not lace, it's tatting, and they're nothing alike. And this is a little mammy doll. She reminds us of a little African lady with a dark skin. And so, young lady, since you are young, I say close your eyes. Close your eyes. Just a little bit. Open your eyes. How about that? This is called a topsy-turvy doll. And this reminds us of the first port of entry in the New World of the slave, which was the Caribbean islands. And so she's sort of like a little, caramel color here. And this is called butterfly tatting. I have to show this to at least one person because it's a lost art. This is called butterfly tatting. It's tatted on this side and on that side. So isn't that beautiful? It's horsehair on her head. So this is the handiwork of a slave. So we think of slaves as being some sort of little base buffoons, pickaninnies. You heard that term, pickaninnies? That means a cotton picking nincompoop. That's why they call them pickaninnies. So, at any rate, this is the little topsy-turvy doll. And my daughter accessorized her when she was young. She put some rouge on her cheek. She got that from my sister, because my sister used to put rouge on her cheek. And I went to the house one time in 1970-something to visit my mother, and my sister had rouge on, and I said, honey, what are you doing with the rouge on your cheek? And she said, oh, I know you. You're one of those guys like you've always been, who don't like makeup. And you guys have like afros and things. You don't like, I said, no, that's not it. The real thing is that black girls don't blush. And she said, oh my goodness. She was so displeased with who she was that she would put something on that was different than her possibilities. Now, I don't necessarily like blush, but if you put it on, it's okay. It works. It works. It could happen. But if I put it on, call 911. So she put that little rouge on there. So the point of me saying that last part was, when you're all right. You're all right because that's the way God made you. You're all right. You can do what you want to with yourself, but believe me, it won't make you any better. You'll still wake up and be you. Let me tell you about a real mammy. 1969, I came home to the country, and I had a carload of ne'er-do-wells with me. And they came from a commune in Big Sur called Salmon Creek Commune. And they all came down to my grandma's house in Missouri, and we were all just like, just probably on drugs, definitely. And, there was a lady there named Miss Effie Yoakum. Miss Effie Yoakum was the daughter of a slave. Her son is the great Fireball Yoakum, who played with the Kansas City Monarchs. And the only reason he's not the most famous pitcher in the world is because of Satchel Paige. They played on the same team. So if you happen to be great, you're just only second with Satchel Paige on your team. Great baseball player. And so Miss Effie was on one side of the yard, and my grandma was out there when we drove up in a van. And they had people in there who had on all kinds of outfits and things, and who knows. And so there was a girl who had one of those granny dresses on, that go all the way to the ground. And another one who had a mini dress who was like way up here. And Miss Effie was so scandalized, as so was my grandmother. But Miss Effie was vocally scandalized. And she said, how could you let this boy in your yard? And my grandmother said to her, Effie, do you remember those long dresses we used to wear when we were kids? And Miss Effie said, oh, yes. I said, that was a real nice thing, Oh, yes. Modesty. And my grandmother said, Effie, we could get those long dresses up just as quick as they could get the short ones up. So she was not defending my stupidity. She was covering my nakedness. You see, that's what a matriarch or a patriarch does. They cover the little one's nakedness. When you see this one who is suffering, you cover their nakedness. When you see these people that you don't necessarily approve of, you don't shun them. You talk to them. You bless them. And so afterwards, of course, Grandma gave me the business after everybody went away. How dare you embarrass the family in such a way? But she covered my nakedness. As we know, the sin of Noah's children was not that they saw their father naked. The sin was that they didn't cover their father's nakedness. So that's what a matriarch and that's what a patriarch does. They cover their children's nakedness so they won't be exposed. We don't throw our brothers and sisters to the wolves. We gather them in some fashion or another in imitation of Jesus, who said quite plainly that how many times I would have gathered you under my wing as a hen does for her little ones, for her chicks, but you would not let me. So this is the story of the matriarch. I've been saying the next sentence for the last many years. She's on her way to the National Doll Museum in Washington, D.C. So they can take care of this dress and thing. She hasn't made it yet. So I kind of, I'll leave that to the next generation. My daughter can do that. Yeah. There's these ladies were what they call, these are the Dodd girls. Charlene and Claudette Dodd, who were little slave girls. And they were praying girls. They prayed. You know, when we say that the prayer of a righteous man or girl counts for much. And so they prayed. They prayed for all of our family, and they looked after people even when they were little. And they're still talked about until this very day. Because they leave behind, as I said in the film, a loving legacy which people of today cannot deny. That's what we hope to do. We hope to leave behind a loving legacy. And I'm telling you something, brothers and sisters, if you're from Warren, Ohio, gather what you can. And you have an opportunity, putting you on the spot, you didn't tell me this, but you have an opportunity to come and learn about your history in the church, so you won't have to make it up. Or not just make it up out of nothing, but make it up because you don't have enough background. Or at least you haven't been directed to the proper sources to have the background. Yeah. So there it is. Any questions? Go ahead, brother. What? 26. 26. Been a long time getting there. What? Well, I love the faith. I love those words I talked to. I love the words of the hymns and of the liturgy, and I love that. I love the iconography. I just had a difficult time with some of the people. I lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and before I became Orthodox, and the kids were small, and by the time I was 28 by then, and the kids were small. I think one kid didn't even exist. Elijah was small, and I decided to go down to this big church downtown. And I saw an advertisement in the paper that says, these great mosaics on display, because they had these beautiful mosaics which were made by an Italian company which was making their swan song appearance. This was their last work that they did to complete the mosaics in that church and to repair all the old, which they've been working on since the 40s. And so I went. They said, "Come down to this church. You'll love it. You'll love it." That's what the newspaper said. So I went down there, went into the church, and all of a sudden, this woman comes up to me. She said, "May I help you?" There's all kinds of people in that church. They're just sitting there looking at the stuff. Heathens and rich men and poor men. And I said, "No," because I knew what she meant. And she went and got the priest. And the priest came over to where I was, and the priest said, "May I help you, Father?" Not Father, he didn't say Father. "May I help you?" And I said, "Father, I'm interested in the church." And he said to me, "I think you would be happier at the Coptic church." And so I said to myself from that point, I'll never go back down there again. And I had made such a fuss of it in my own mind, as you can see by the things I'm saying, I'm partially nuts, that I wasn't even going to drive down that boulevard anymore. I was going to go around it. And so time went by, time goes, decades go. Young man who's my god nephew becomes the priest of that church. Father Achilles becomes the priest of that church. And he says, "Father, would you come down and give the service on the Sunday of Orthodoxy?" And his stuff was still in there. That's why you don't hold on grudges, because it's an effect on you, not just then, but forever. It ruins you. And so I said, no, I can't do it. He goes, oh, please, I really like, he didn't know any of this stuff. I'd really like for you to come down and just be with us and just give something about the Sunday of Orthodoxy. And I said, okay, I'll do it for you. He's such a sweet boy. He's a man now. I mean, he's 40-something himself. And so I said, okay, I'll come there. And I gave that story, I told that story because we're talking about hospitality on the Sunday of Orthodoxy. And so, and this lady, this little old ancient lady comes up to me and dressed in black like a little ethnic woman, you know, with the whole picture, you know, with a little scarf thing. And she says, Father, I was that secretary that told you that. Because I told the story, you know. And she starts crying. And I said, oh my goodness. And I started crying. And we're both standing there in a hall that's like 3 times the size of your hall. This big hall. We're standing in the middle of the floor and we're crying. We were showstoppers. Everybody was silent. They wondered what was going on. And then she said, oh, Father, please forgive Father so-and-so because, you know, he was a little prejudiced, you know. And of course, what do? We take the high road. When someone says, one cheek is all you get, we say, turn the other cheek. And I said, no, dear, he wasn't prejudiced. It's for her. I'm not totally blind. It was for her. And I said, you know what he was doing? He thought he could protect his flock from certain people. And he thought I was one of those people. That's what happened. He was trying to protect you, as if Christ needed us for his protectors in that way. We have to look out, of course. Wise as serpents we must be, and gentle as doves and lambs. Which one is it, doves or lambs? Gentle like doves. So we were there, and we just loved each other. And it was something, it was freeing for me. Freeing for me. Wasn't conscious of it. Do you know that we suffer some things that we don't even know about? When we make confession, we say, forgive me for the sins which I know and those which I do not know. That's not a clever way of saying things. It's that we've done so much that we can't even know what we've done, just like the man who owed so much that he could never pay it back. He owed so much that he forgot what he even owed. And I told you about that Larry Powley fellow, remember? There's probably tons of them in there on the same category that I can't even remember. And they've made me weak. And they've cost me dearly. I shouldn't talk anymore, I'll start crying. They get to you, those things that you hold against other people. So be careful that you give yourself enough opportunity to forgive your brother and to let him off the hook a bit. Take your foot off his neck just a tad. A little bit. Nope, Grandma would say no. All the way. Take it off. So this is how we do it. So yes, it took a while because I didn't trust these people. And I still don't. And I still don't. And you know what it is? A sin. I trust certain people who I know about. I think I know about them. But as the scripture says, no man knows. I couldn't find it in the scriptures. My mama and grandma used to say this. No man knows another man's goings and comings. Scripture, that's what they'd say. But I do know this, that the psalmist says that no man knows how another man watereth his couch. You don't know about the tears I cry at night. And I don't know about yours. You don't know about my brokenheartedness, and I don't know about yours. But with anything that we do, that we say, or that we use as reason for not finding out about the true faith that belongs to all of us, the more we are hiding our talent in the ground, and there will be a reckoning. There will be a reckoning, and we'll have to say, I knew that those folks there had no icons of St. Moses on the wall. I knew that there were no black priests around there. And Jesus will say, just as he said to the man that said, "And I buried it in the ground," he will say to us, "Take that which he has and give it to another." Was that too abstract, that last part? Yes or no? Good, good. I have to be careful. I don't have my wife here to give me the high signs. And the people who could give me the high sign won't do it, so. All right. So, any other questions? Yes. Yes, sir.
Father, in regards to your faith,
Because to my what?
being part of the faith, when you were studying the fathers, you mentioned some of the icons, like Moses, Abraham, and so forth. Were you affected by their teachings when you were developing yourself?
Secondly, yes.
Does any of them stand out in your transformation of faith?
Of course, St. Ambrose was a good example when he said, but you see, we're attracted by things that we see, oftentimes before we know about them. We have to. We look going down the road, we see a stoplight. We don't see this other sign there that says, beyond it, so-and-so street, 1/4 mile. So we see the thing from afar, and we're attracted to it for some reason. And the reason may be shallow or seemingly shallow, and then we find out more. St. Ambrose said that sin is slavish, while blamelessness is free. And many a slave is freer than his master, seeing that he, the master, auctions himself off for a very small sum. So, yeah, it appeals to me. But when I see St. Ambrose as this, figure, and the iconography is appealing to me, that draws me first. There have been many people who have been drawn to a mate, actually, by first glance. And come to find out, she's not all she cracked up to be. Or I could have said he just as easily. But we are attracted by things that we see. And that's why I say about these icons. We're attracted by them. And they move us in a certain way. Now we have to find out what they say later. St. Moses moved me when I first saw him, because I knew it was an icon that looked like me. He had nostrils like mine. He had hair like mine, or I used to have it. He had all those features that I had. But I didn't know that he also said, as I later found out, he also said, I was grieved, but I kept silent. He also didn't know that he said that when he was made a priest, people would come from all parts of Africa and Egypt, because he lived in the desert, in the Egyptian desert. People would come from all over to have wisdom from him. And once a group of people came there, and they said, and they knocked on his cell, or summoned him from his cell, and he opened the door and then closed it. And they waited a little bit. He did it again. They did it again. He didn't open it. They kept doing that until finally it started to rain. And they were getting, it's kind of not that usual of a thing in the desert, but it started to rain. It does happen. And by and by, he opened the door and said, "Come in." And they said, "Well, why did it take you so long to answer the door here?" And he said, "Because I didn't have anything to give you. And so when it started to rain, I got some water, and I made some lentils for you so that you would be refreshed." I didn't know that. But I knew that something exterior attracted me. But there's the depths of the saints is an amazing thing, because they are informed by God. They are the ones that we ask them to add their prayers to our prayers, because we know that they endured. We know that they gave up their life. When Moses could have fled from the desert when the barbarians were about to attack Sketis and kill all the people there, he said, "He who lives by the sword shall die by the sword." And he told his disciples to disperse. But he stood there because he had lived a riotous life himself. I found that out later. Because maybe it would have been too much for me to bear. So did I answer what you said? What you asked, Father? Good. Who are you? Who are you, Father? Father, what's your name, Father?
Father Daniel Rohan.
Good to meet you, Father Daniel. So, this is how it is. This is how it is in our life in Christ. If we don't start applying these things, these principles, if we don't start looking everywhere we can for the truth of the faith, we'll be lost. And it won't be anybody. It could have been somebody else's fault before today, but now you know. Yes. Oh. Do what?
I talked to somebody downstairs about this because I wanted to ask you earlier. I don't want to be a little crowd for everybody else. I love it. I just got to learn some more about it.
Sure. He can teach you.
How come he can teach me?
Mm-hmm. Are you with him in the town? No. Oh, okay, never mind. I'm sorry. I thought you were with him.
Youngstown, Jordan. My question would be, and don't take this out of offense, because I know your church
Go ahead.
evangelize and they don't do revivals. My thing is, if this is like...
We do revivals. The church does those things. No one says the Orthodox Church doesn't do those things.
Here's what when I go to his church, my thing is, he says, well, I read it to you. This is like the first church, okay? And my thing with the knowledge and understanding y'all have, and the things like he tells me, he said, Preston, one thing I love about the church, I can go back on anything that anybody says, and I can look it up and make sure it's said the way it's supposed to be said.
Right.
Correctly.
Right.
My thing about it is, with all the knowledge this church has, or any Orthodox church, I just don't understand it. I mean, me being, I want to be a minister. I want to be anything what God wants me to be. My thing about it is, I want to learn all of his words from anybody and everybody. And my thing about it is, I just want to know if y'all have all this enlightenment and all this knowledge, why don't we spread out to everybody and have everybody?
We're failure. We've fallen, all have sinned and fallen short of the kingdom of heaven. That's the reason. And that's how we feel with our children. We don't pass on the things that they should know either. We don't tell them the way it really is sometimes. Well, maybe you should find a gentler way so they will like it. But this is, or they probably won't. Forget that last part. Yeah. But the point is that I shouldn't have made that point and used you like that. But the point of it is that because of our shortcomings, because of our frailty, because we don't even know what we have sometimes. We don't know what we have most of the time. Because if we did know what we had, we wouldn't say, oh, sorry. Sometimes we don't know what we have as a church. You talked about we have all this knowledge and so forth. Sometimes we just don't know what we have. Don't know what we have. There's so much more I could have learned about my family, about the African American tradition in America, because my family has fought in every war in this country. My great-great-grandfather was in the Revolutionary War. I'm a card-carrying member of the Sons of the Revolution. My grandfather fought in the Civil War. My great-uncle Ellis, who I knew, fought in the World War I. My Uncle Harrison, my great-uncle Harrison, was a Buffalo soldier. He fought with Teddy Roosevelt at San Juan. My Uncle Lawrence and Uncle Millard were wounded in World War II. My dad helped rewire Nagasaki after the bomb and came back to the United States and couldn't even get into the electricians union because they weren't having black soldiers or black men. So there's so much that they could have passed on to me. They gave me the basic kind of thing that happened because they thought I was too tender. And probably I was. But if you find something that you have to communicate something to someone and you think that they are too tender, you have to find a way to do it anyway. So, yes, I will never deny that we have it, but sometimes we keep it to ourselves. And sometimes we don't enter in ourselves and prevent others from entering in, saith the Lord. Yes. Oh.
This is what you're doing is Orthodox evangelization.
Yes. I mean, and everybody has their own way of doing it, but we just sometimes don't do it. And everybody has a way of doing it. Sometimes people can't speak, but maybe they can do other things. Maybe they can write some of these little beautiful cards that you can have something like this, and you see those little smart alecky gangbangers, and you can give them one of these. I was at a gang summit in Lansing, Michigan, the Bloods and the Crips, and my spiritual father, Father Roman Braga, asked me to come down and talk to these guys. I don't know if you've heard of Gang Summit. That's when two opposing gang groups come together and try and work out their problems. And so they had hip-hop music, which I like. They had gangster rap, which I do not like. They had spoken word, which I love, as part of the presentation. And they had something like this guys playing the blues. I don't think they wanted to be, the Black Blues Travelers or something. And because it wasn't genuine blues. And there I was supposed to talk about the paradise of the Holy Fathers, the Desert Saints. And I looked out on this room, and there were a group of people, these young, angry, because they were so disillusioned and heartbroken, and never raised, some of them. And some rejected the raising that they were given. And they were out there, and right in the middle of there was one little white figure, Father Roman Braga. And standing by him was Archbishop Nathaniel, and their driver, who was so nervous he went back to the car. But they were in there. And so it gave me courage to present this. And you could have heard a pin drop. You could have heard a pin drop, because they want the same thing that everybody else does. They want to know the truth of the matter. They want to know where the flowers are in God's garden that look like them. Yeah, that's what they want to know. And so, what would come of this? And they said, this one little boy got up there and he says, he's young, he's a teenager, no doubt. They all were, mostly, I think. And he said, why didn't anybody ever tell us about these saints in the church? And Archbishop, he said, and I said, I'm not going to take the rap for this. And so I said, because he didn't tell you. And I pointed at Archbishop Nathaniel. I said, because he didn't tell you. And Bishop Nathaniel said, he stood up and he said, well, I'll tell you. You come to my church anytime you want. And he told him blah, blah, blah. One of those young men became his subdeacon in Detroit. So, we don't know who was among us. But we do know from Paul Lawrence Dunbar that the saints and the sinners were so mixed up on that floor that I'm sure God could not have separated them if the trumpets had chanced to blow. So that's what we've got it. We've got it. We don't use it. We'll have a reckoning with God about that. How come you knew this and didn't tell anybody that? Did you think that was all right? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that, because church in the Black community is very community-based, it's like it's a safe space for us, oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that having African Americans in Orthodoxy would be a better think we should go toward having like an African American Orthodox church, or do you think we should move toward making it more inclusive, like all of them more inclusive for everyone?
Must be inclusive for everybody. This is God's church. This is God's church. I didn't say this, but one of the things that turned me away from, after I heard that call in jail, was my friend Robert and I went to a church in downtown Jefferson City, on Easter Sunday, probably high as a kite, with chicken bones braided in my hair, wild boys. And they told us we had to leave because they thought they knew who we were. They thought they knew who we were by this outer crust, which will eventually, as St. Cicero says, rot. Yeah. And so, yeah, everybody should come there. I mean, I think that, you have areas that you believe in. Father Moses is in the Ozarks Mountains in Missouri. White people can't come? They must. That's who lives there. In the inner city on the hill, people must come there from the area. And it was some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was at Carnegie Mellon Institute, and they had a quilt show there in the hall of, what's the name of the hall of something, where they have all those church replicas there. Anyway, it was Carnegie Mellon. And I had an evening away, and I decided that I would go, being a person who loves African American history. I went to the Underground Railroad stop on the hill in that town, Pittsburgh. And I said an akathisis to St. Moses on that hilltop. And I looked around and saw these people who were I assumed, and I'm sure this was true, although I profiled them. It's okay to profile if you don't condemn. And and they didn't know what to do. And I read that akathisis line that says, "She, speaking of the Mother of God, makes most eloquent orators as dumb as fish." And I thought, I will say this prayer here. And I said it, and you know what? That's where your church is, just a few blocks from there now. So, it's for everyone. The church is for everyone. They will have regional areas. I mean, my goodness. If you move to, well, not anymore, but if you move to Harlem, it'd probably be mostly black. But if a white person comes in your midst, you better give him the chief place, as the scripture tells us. So, I mean, I didn't hear all you said. Is that what you said, dear? Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little about the impact and presence of Christianity and early Christianity in Africa, the first few centuries of the church?
The impact of it? Changed the world. Changed the world. I mean, this, I don't know what you're concerning.
Just about the growth of the church and the first.
Well, we know that, as Bishop Thomas said in his opening address, that the first baptism that we hear about in the New Testament was he didn't say this, but it was Queen Candace Eunuch, who was baptized by Philip, the apostle of the 70. And he baptized Queen Candace Eunuch. So this tradition of Orthodoxy in Africa was from the very beginning. From the very beginning. St. Fenurios, when the African saint evangelized Ireland, of all places. And if you look at the icons, the Irish icons with the runes that you see around it, look at the Ethiopian icons, same ones. Same ones. And some people might say, well, that's just phenomena. That's like music, there's only certain chords you can play. Well, no, it's a direct result of St. Fenurios evangelizing that country. So it's had a great influence. Yes, sir. One second.
Coptic Christianity at all?
That was part of it, because it was all just Christianity until they had the divisions. We had the divisions and the splits, which my spiritual father, Roman, used to refer to as an unfortunate set of circumstances. Which means the division is sometimes not as stark as we think. I don't know if you remember when Archbishop Job was speaking one time, and these people asked him, we had a clergy meeting, we're in the same diocese, and this man said, he said, well, what about the Coptics? who come to our church and they want to receive communion, and Archbishop Joe says, "Can they say the creed?" And the guy goes, "Yeah." He says, "Well, then they can come." And someone else said, "Do you mean to say that I can say that Archbishop Job said, if they can say the creed, they can come?" He didn't know. He did know. He was deliberately contradicting the most simple gesture and making it something so complicated. So, at any rate, yes, that's part of this. That's part of the early church.
Give you another amen.
What?
Amen.
Amen. Look at back here. So, was there another hand that went up somewhere? Oh, yes. Oh, Father. I'm sorry.
Father, from what I've read, of late, we're talking about church in Africa. The growth of Orthodoxy there amongst the black people has been expanding. Have you noticed that?
Oh, of course.
I've noticed there's been a constant
Tremendous amount. Because we as a nation of Orthodox people, we as an Orthodox country, find it much easier to minister to people who are beholding. Much easier to minister to people who need some water and some bread.
I know because
In America, we don't need your water and we don't need your bread.
But I know, like Orthodox Mission Center in Florida, they're constantly requesting
Yeah.
assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And they mentioned in their presentations about Uganda,
Mm-hmm.
areas that they want to send as much material things and spiritual things to those areas. And the need is there because of the expansion of the faith amongst the people in various aspects of life.
Right.
Also, from my experience living in this area here, I find out that the black people, if they are participating in the life of the Orthodox Church, I know from their experience and their own traditional communities, they've been very, how do you say, spiritually vocal, expressing their
Spiritually what?
spiritually, they're participating in the worship service of their traditions. But when they come into the Orthodox faith, they have that already grounded where they want to participate fully in the life of the worship of the Orthodox Church. So I see them not sitting, they're gonna, we may have a choir.
Oh, sure.
But they're going to be in the pews singing along with the choir, participating
Mm-hmm.
fully in the life of the church.
Right.
All aspects of it.
I agree. But the only one part that's missing of what you just said, the they is much bigger. The they, those Orthodox community, the black community, is much bigger than the they you know about. It's a very big. It's from soup to nuts. It's from all, and literally and figuratively. It was all kinds of folks. We have people who were born in the Orthodox, in the black tradition, who were born Episcopalians. Mother Catherine's third generation Episcopal priest daughter. I mean, so we don't want to reduce us down to just a certain type of African church or African. Does it seem like I'm cutting you off? Tell me the truth, Father. Does it seem like I'm cutting you off?
Don't start me.
Okay. Well, all right, you can start, but I just don't want to be offensive. But that sort of, as they say, triggers me.
But one thing I want to say, my contact with the black people from this area got acquainted with, whether they see me in the car or not, sometimes they don't because I'm doing domestic things. There's always the respect, they always refer to me as Father. Thank you, Father. Thank you, this.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I'm wearing a collar or not, there's a respect, and there's a response on our part extending that gift
Right.
to them also too. And then it expands because they show their love in many ways.
Yeah, the generation that taught those people to be respectful like that is rapidly fading. It's rapidly fading. And because they were taught by people, like their generations before them taught them about respecting people, about looking out for people. The newer generation have become just like regular old Americans who don't respect very much. So I'm just saying that part, because...
That's without reference to color. That's
yeah.
the young people.
Yeah, yeah. It's the zeitgeist of the age. Yes.
Yeah, you were commenting on what he had said before.
About?
Questions about telling kids about things. Sometimes, I'm a teacher, and sometimes I'll bring up things that, especially when I was in high school, about things, and the parents will complain mostly, we don't want our kids to know that. Things like that. Like CIA getting drugs into the black community or anything else, and things like that. They say, well, what are you doing? I say, prove them. And they say, well, we still along their own things.
Yeah. Well, sometimes the parents are sometimes ignorant, sometimes afraid. Sometimes they feel like their precious children should be sheltered, and they should be. But be careful, because you're releasing sheltered children into the world who has no regard for their sheltered life.
And my second is about respect.
Yes, sir.
I know we're already against the break.
Oh, we are?
Just something from what the gentleman from Youngstown, the lady, heard about the community and evangelism. I've been working in the inner city in Cleveland. It's an observation I want to comment on. And, we have prayers, we do reader service there at the St. Herman House, one Sunday a month we in the office. If I want people to go to church with me, it's an enormous challenge, because those churches aren't in their neighborhood, and the people in those churches don't look like me. And I'm not just talking about the
I think I got it.
I'm talking about the poor, toothless white guy that doesn't like the way he looks. But if I told, I might get one, I might get two. But if I do a reader service in the house, I might get 15, I might get 27. And I just feel like that Orthodox evangelism Jesus came into the world. He didn't try to save us from heaven. And somehow the Orthodox Church has to go into the streets or into the neighborhoods and establish the kingdom there, because I just feel the longer I do this, the more realistic it seems to be able to pull people out of these neighborhoods into some different suburban situation that's, and I'm not even faulting it, it's just sort of a demographic and geographic reality that makes it
More difficult.
It makes it difficult to do what I really want to do.
So, I wish I could cry with you, but I just say, bear it. And you say the same thing to me. You say the same thing to me. Bear it, Father Moses. That's what we do. Because sometimes I feel like driving straight on down the highway. And, we all do. We bear it. And we say, have we suffered? Ha ha. Not like the long suffering that's required of us to enter into the kingdom of heaven. There's a man I knew once. I had a drop-in center in Detroit, Michigan, for wayward inner city youth. And down the corner of Jefferson and Grand Boulevard. It's like where the boogermen live. And I used to not like people to come there who were some of my friends, because they were just too, they just didn't know how to minister to those people. There was one man, his name was Michael Harris. He was in the original cast of Hair. He had one leg, and he was just the most howdy-doody guy you've ever seen. And he would come there, and he would play show tunes on the piano in the center, Hello Dolly, and It's the Hard Luck Life, and all those kind of things. And people loved him. They loved him. Because all that he had, he brought to them. And as the old Negro spiritual goes, what you have may not seem much, but when you yield it to the touch of the Master's loving hand, then all will be transformed. So this is what we do. This is not an easy task. We will say, Lord, I'm here, and I don't really think you're going to say, well done, but you might have said, not that bad. Not that bad. We'll give you a little something. So, be of good cheer. You've been at this a long time, and you've been an inspiration to me, and all along. And not only have you been inspirational, you've also been hospitable, and in ways that you and I only know about. And so those are the things that last. Those are the things that last, and we suffer. But so what? Might be the only way we make it into the kingdom. Yes.
Lies live when truth is silent.
I'm sorry.
Lies live when truth is silent.
Mm-hmm.
The apologetics that are necessary for my evangelism, there's a generation that is influenced by information that has come through some of those musical genres that you spoke about earlier. They're more than just musical genres.
Yeah.
There's indoctrination that's involved inside of it that brings about a lot of questions inside of the African American community that has caused many to actually gravitate away from the Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
5% Nation of God.
Absolutely.
Nation of Islam.
1%ers. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hebrew Israelites.
Mm-hmm. Yahweh ben Yahweh.
Yes,
all of them.
So, this truth of early African Christianity and African Christianity being present in Africa, even as early as the 1st century. As the gentleman alluded to earlier, as far as evangelism from the Orthodox Church, because in many of our faith traditions, we speak in terms of orthodoxy, and that's not the issue.
Right.
The issue has always been orthodoxy. And when we take a look at the Apostle Paul's intolerance of Peter's behavior amongst the Gentile congregation, where he said that you are presenting a contradictory picture of what the true picture of Christianity is, as being inclusive of people, but yet still carrying the exclusive message that Jesus Christ is the only way. What is being, or could easily be heard, a specific way. Because what I've heard a few times, which I don't believe that you are saying, that you say that the information is held by the Orthodox Church, and it's come to the Orthodox Church. However, what we have is a generation that has been taught, as I said, that has been taught that Christianity is the white man's religion. So while we emphasize come, the emphasis of us going is also just as important, because right now there's a generation that I go to, they're not going to come. And they're not going to come not just to Orthodox church, they're not coming to any church, because they are of the belief that Jesus is a blue-eyed, straight-haired, pale-faced European, and because of the legacy of slavery that used the scripture to reinforce racist ideas, the use of pseudoscience that even to this day, many of the things that pertain to Darwinianism that was really just racist science, it's still being taught to this very day. How do we bring ourselves to having that level of righteous indignation to where we say that this type of information is intolerable, even amongst the practices of, it's not enough for us just to be orthodox in what we think. We have to be orthodox in what we practice.
Yeah, I agree. One of the ways that we do that is we show them. When they talk about this blue-eyed, blonde-haired Jesus, is to show them early depictions of him in iconographic figures. That's all brand new. this blue-eyed thing. You know, we have to teach them where the truth is, and not just say this is not true. And so that's one of the ways that we begin this conversation. It's not enough to say it's not true. We have to say this is true. This is true. The Saint Mary of Egypt here is a dark Saint Mary of Egypt, which is good. A lot of them are being actually very pale skin. So we have to show them this Saint Mary of Egypt. This is from the prototype. I mean, it's a big question that you ask. It's a big question that you ask. And part of the solution is, you say they won't come. You know, be the leader. Be their leader and bring them. Bring them to the knowledge of the truth. Bring them to what those early church fathers said. Bring that to them. Because there's always going to be some excuse that we give why we don't abandon the common American view of the church. There's always going to be some reason. It is. But we must go deeper than that. We do not settle for any of that. No one can tell me. Because I think maybe it's because of where I come from or how I'm raised. Maybe not. Maybe it's just the luck of the draw. It might have been time in the penitentiary. I don't know. But no one can tell me that this is not my church. And no one can tell me that blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus is the way it is. Not after I've seen the first depictions on the catacomb walls in Jerusalem. You can't tell me that. But I don't want to argue with you because you might see that and might be salvific for you. But I want to show you what the real thing looks like. So we have to work with these people. We're responsible for those young people. We are very responsible for them. So if they come to us and ask for a fish, we don't give them a stone. When they come for us and ask us for what's the real story on this, we give them the real truth. It might not be as it's presented in the modern world. You know, when I asked that priest about that icon of St. Moses, I thought, you know what he told me? He said, this is from a prototype of the icon of St. Moses on the trapeza, the dining room hall of the monastery in Romania. What's a black Jesus doing in Romania? They were true to the prototype. So if you have something other than that, if you see St. Moses maybe it's sort of a little tan, probably not true. Probably somebody, that's all they could do. It's as far as they could go. We can't have him being a sub-Saharan African. So anyway, we've got our work cut out for it. I'll help you in any way. And we will explore this thing, and we'll work with each other. And because what you propose to do is quite lofty. And it will probably break your heart in the end. So what? Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted, to set at liberty those who are bruised. And we have to leave and to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. Amen.